Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. I want to spend some time on the podcast today talking a little bit about what's happening here in Canada, in our country. Clearly, over the last couple of days, we and I think just about everybody in the media internationally have been fixated, maybe even obsessed with some of the stuff going on in the United States with Hegseth and bombing boats that are allegedly drug boats and all the sort of thing that's going on. And of course, Trump being Trump and falling asleep in front of cabinet meetings and all that sort of stuff. There's a fascination to it, and kind of a morbid fascination, really. Because we're watching a great nation that used to be the envy of the world, basically collapsing in front of our eyes. And we'll talk about why and how that's happening, I know, in future podcasts. But I want to talk about what's going on here. Because oftentimes when the media does get fixated on a topic like that, we tend to forget about what's happening in this country. And when that happens, sadly, what we get in this country is the gospel according to Pierre Poilievre. and that can be dangerous to actually listen to his take on what he thinks is going on or should be going on. Because listen, to hear Poilievre speak, Canada's going to hell in a handcart. The Liberals' budget is terrible. We're going to be driving deep into depression. People are going to starve to death on the streets. Businesses are going to shut down. It's a pretty bleak picture. Very much, again, a page out of the MAGA playbook, isn't it? I mean, that's how Donald Trump always talked about the American economy under Biden and Obama. As I say, they don't deal in facts, they deal in fear. And Poilievre has torn that page out of the playbook and tries to do that here. Well, I'd like to think that we don't buy that in this country. And I'm going to show you why, with some of the numbers that did come out over a while, because there are people that are tracking what's happening here. And the premise for this whole thing is, the world right now is in economic turmoil. And a lot of it has to do with Trump because of the tariffs. He's tariffing everybody right now. And everybody is dealing with it, and everybody's having problems with it. To have unwarranted tariffs, whether you're in the UK, whether any one of the European nations, and of course here in Canada and in Mexico, this is a curveball that not too many people saw coming, and we all have to pivot. In spite of all that, though, here are some numbers that came out over the last couple of days that I think will add some clarity, maybe give you a clearer picture of just what's happening here in Canada. Yes, the budget did pass. Yes, the big infrastructure bill that Prime Minister Carney talked about in the springtime did pass. And by the way, with the support of the Conservatives, that one clear-headed moment I think that they had. It's not coincidental, I guess, that Poilievre wasn't in the House when that happened. But anyway, so the framework for the recovery that Mark Carney's talked about is in place. It's not it's not totally working yet. That takes time, right? Obviously, there's allocation of money. There has to be resources for some of these big projects. But we kind of know where we're going on this. And those that look at these sorts of things have some interesting news here. A new report by the International Monetary Fund says the Canadian economy has actually held up better than everybody expected, including Pierre Poilievre, I suppose. Now, the IMF is an agency, of course, international agency, that studies and analyzes economies in different countries around the world. So it's not new that they're focusing on Canada. They do this every year. This report goes on to say everybody was talking about the impact and the negative impact it was going to have on Canada, and we knew that was happening. The Prime Minister told us that. But they say in spite of that, the problems and the impact of those tariffs was mitigated by exemptions under the free trade agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. As the Prime Minister said, no, we don't have a new deal right now with Donald Trump, but the existing deal, which is still in play, is still the best trade deal of any other country in the world has with the United States. And that's important, which is one of the reasons why we want to see the trade deal, the COSMA deal, as we call it on this side of the border, to be maintained. And that's going to happen, I guess, with future talks, as we've talked about. What the report says, though, they are still concerned about the lack of investment. It's weakened. And that's understandable. Because there is no stability. Economics 101 says that people are not going to invest lots and lots of money in projects when they know that they could change dramatically at the whim of the crazy man in the White House. And that's going to be problematic. And that instability, by the way, and lack of investment is not a problem unique to Canada. Yes, it's our problem, and we have to deal with it. But it's happening in every other country that Trump's filthy little economic hands in, too, including the United States, by the way. So until there is more stability, that there's always going to be a problem with investment. And Prime Minister Carney has talked about that, and he's addressed that and said, look, this is one of the reasons why we have to get some of these big projects on. They're looking for the private sector to get involved in this, but you have to make yourselves attractive to do that. I mean, attractive economically. And we, as Canadians, have not done a very good job of that over the last 10, 15 years. He's trying to change that, and there's some signs that it is happening. So, better than expected. That's always good news. And on that same thought, and down that same line of thinking, numbers about employment and unemployment came out just today, too, which is another one of the things, of course, that the Canadian government has been concerned about, and the opposition parties have been slamming the government on this. Well, as of today, as we do this podcast, the labor market surprised economists again in November with the third straight month of job gains. Third straight month of job gains. Unemployment rate fell to 6.5%, down from 6.9% the month before. And there were 26,000 fewer people in the labor market last month, pushing the jobless rate even lower. So people are finding jobs. Now, that's the good news. And you take that for what it's worth, because the other side of the coin is job losses and people can't find work. And that's something that the opposition parties have been harping on. Well, this indicates that the tide is turning. It's not going to happen overnight. Nobody's going to release a report next week that's going to say everybody who wants a job has got one, and they're all making great money, and they've all got benefits. We're all going to live happily ever after. You don't do that. You don't turn a big ship like Canada around overnight. It takes time to do that. But the fact that people are starting to find work is very positive for the third month in a row. And that's an important aspect of this. 181,000 jobs were added from September through November. And yes, there are some concerns about this right now because an awful lot of that, of course, is part-time work. But again, that's a characteristic of employment in many other countries now, too. When there's instability that we just talked about a few minutes ago, it's awfully difficult for companies to move into expansion mode and create full-time jobs. Part-time work has been a phenomenon that's been growing for years and years and years, but at least they're jobs. And that's a foot in the door. And hopefully, as more stability is created through some of the initiatives of our government, we're going to start to see that. The other one, too, was youth employment, because those numbers were rather troubling a month or so ago. And they tracked that as well. And youth employment, age 15 to 24, actually found more work right now. Tough labor market, they said, but StatsCan says the demographic added 50,000 jobs in November. That's 50,000 jobs for youth employment that over the last little while. So the numbers indicate that things are slowly getting better. And again, you don't move at warp speed with this. It's going to take a little bit of time. But, the hue and cry from some of the opposition parties and some of the pundits on the right side of the political spectrum here and the media spectrum have been jumping all up and down, said, "Be poor young people that can't find jobs." Apparently they can. Not everybody necessarily, but there are jobs out there. And we've all heard the story, too, just a couple of days ago, that Tim Hortons, of course, has actually been lobbying the federal government to bring in more part-time workers, seasonal workers, because they can't find people to fill the jobs at the Tim Hortons stores. So, there's some mixed messaging going on there. But the positive out of all of this is that we are creating jobs in this country. Now, of course, the economists look at this, and let's face it, economists are the dour-faced people that always tell you the glass is half empty. Doug Porter from BMO, the chief economist there, says, it's not as good as it should be, and they're all part-time jobs. So, it's good news, I suppose. And that's the way that I saw the CBC report on this, too. I mean, these guys just can't stand to see the government with positive news here. It must really bother them. Sorry about that, guys, but it's going to be happening more and more. But Porter went on to say, though, in spite of the fact that he was skeptical about this and thought, well, it's not as good as it could have been. I don't know what the hell he was expecting. But he says the last time we saw a 6-tick drop in unemployment in a 2-month span was way back in 1999 during the last tech boom. So this tells me that we're moving in the right direction, and there's some positive movement, not just incremental, but there's some positive gains being made here. If this is the best report we've seen in unemployment and employment in the last 26 years, I'm not suggesting we start popping champagne corks and say happy days are here again. Certainly not. But by the same token, we're doing something about our economy. We're not just sitting here wringing our hands, and we're not just putting slogans out there. Build homes, do this. This government is doing something about it. And I, as a Canadian taxpayer, am glad to see that, because I think it's important that we see positive direction. And when the polling is done, and let's face it, we talk about polls on the podcast a lot, Canadians' opinion about this government and that government and individuals, etc., and leadership, or the lack of leadership, I guess, in some cases. One of the things that they state, and that we've heard this pretty consistently through all of these, is Canadians are waiting to see some good news. And the fact that some of these policies the government's talking about will start to pay dividends. Well, this is the beginning of the good news, isn't it? Right? When the unemployment rate is down, and all of a sudden, when you see youth employment, which was a problem, starting to turn around, and we see that even the International Monetary Fund, who they're not the opposition parties, they're not the government. This is an international body, objective body, that says Canada's doing pretty well. We're a lot better than we thought they were going to do. I mean, let's face it, a lot of economic experts thought that we were going to go right down the dumper because of the tariffs and because of what's happening in the United States. But as Trump continues with his facade of thinking he's an economist, our prime minister, our leader, has said quite frankly, and been open about this even when he's in Washington talking to American leaders, that Canada has to separate itself from the American economy. We have to diversify, and stop being so reliant on that. And there's a reason for that. It's not just because, hey, we're still pissed off at Trump because of the tariffs or some 51st state stuff. I mean, that's all relevant. Sure, it is. But the reality here is that we don't want to get sucked into the vortex now when the United States starts to decline. And they are declining. The numbers in the States are terrible. Employment numbers are terrible. The economy is tanking. Businesses are closing. Factories are closing. It's the total opposite of what Trump promised was going to happen. And, of course, he's in denial, simply saying, no, it's the greatest economy in the world, and the American economy's never been better. It's the opposite, and it's really sad to see. And we feel badly for the American people. And I'm sure there are more than a few people right now that are shaking their heads and said, what the hell were we thinking when we voted for this guy? But that's, as we said, something they're going to have to deal with. We can't do much about that. All we have to do here is look after ourselves. And these numbers, these reports that have come out, indicate that we're in the right direction. And keep in mind, this is a government that hasn't even been in power for a year now. The election was in the springtime. I mean, obviously, Mark Carney took over as prime minister when he became the Liberal leader. But then they went to the people. They went to us. And it was in the springtime that we elected this government. So, you can't expect miracles overnight. But what we are seeing right now is positive growth, a light at the end of the tunnel. And we're getting closer to that light. And that's the ultimate goal here, isn't it? So there's some good news here, and I wanted to focus on that. I'm not going to try to look at this through rose-colored glasses. I mean, there are some immense challenges that are still to come here, and they're going to have an impact on the economy. And as for the things like employment and wages and benefits and things of this nature, sure, those are pretty steep hills that we're going to have to climb, and that's going to continue for the next little while. But we've got to be in a solid place to be able to affect that kind of growth and to look at that. And these numbers indicate that now it's finally starting to happen, and I'm pretty proud about that. By the way, another related story, I guess, that's tied to the economy. I remember the announcement that we talked about, on the podcast a couple of months ago now, that Stellantis backed out of their deal with the federal government. A substantial amount of money, $500 million, of course, was committed by the government for Stellantis. And they were going to spend tons of money and employ lots of people in Brampton and in Windsor at their plants. And then, of course, Stellantis abruptly pulled out of the Brampton deal altogether. Now, they just announced some growth down in Windsor and another shift at, and that's good news, good for the people in Windsor. But the deal with Brampton would caught everybody off guard because they were all there for the photo op, smiling faces, and they took the check, they cashed the check, and it pissed me off, I tell you, to no end. That after they made that announcement, a few days later, there's the head of Stellantis and all the big heads for Stellantis in the Oval Office with Donald Trump shaking hands, talking about a huge investment they're going to make down in the States. Well, to hell with you guys. And of course, there was a lot of consternation on this side of the border, understandably so, about, what's going on here. Did we just, throw money down the drain? Well, we found out this week that Ottawa is moving now against Stellantis after the production shift. Melanie Joly, who's the minister in charge of this right now, she's the industry minister, has said that the Canadian government is now issuing Stellantis a notice of default for the automaker. That effectively, I guess, I don't want to get too deep into the legalese, but an order of default, basically, they're going to sue them. They want the money back. So they're going to have to go through the courts. You can't just go down there and bang on the door and say, give us our money back. But they're going to go through legal terms. This was a contract. It wasn't just a handshake. There's a contract. There were terms in the contract. Stellantis signed it. And obviously the Canadian government signed it, and Stellantis has breached the terms of the contract. And as a result, Canada's saying, okay, deal's off. We want the $500 million back. Now, I doubt very much they're going to cut the check in the next week or so. There's going to be some back and forth on this. But for those that are saying, well, boy, what a stupid deal that the Canadian government made. First of all, it was not a stupid deal. Anytime you get an automaker that is willing to make that sort of a commitment to a community like Brantford, or Brampton, I guess, in this particular case, of course you talk to them about it. And of course, as we've talked about, whether it's the auto industry, whether it's the softwood lumber industry, whether it's any industry, you're going to have to spend money. You're going to have to invest money for these companies to start to flourish again. Yes, you want most of it to be private sector, but at the same time, the government can play a role in this. And here in Ontario, we've seen the Ford government with the same sort of commitments to some of the automakers and to some of those that are trying to get the Ring of Fire, the mineral extraction going on in Northern Ontario in place. It takes financial government money sometimes as an incentive to get the ball rolling on these things. So what they did with Stellantis was a good idea. The problem is Stellantis backed out of the deal. And so, yeah, we want our money back. And yeah, we can invest that money someplace else. So it's not as if the government just writes that off and say, well, we didn't see that coming, do we? Well, let's move on. They're not moving on. They're going to go through the courts, which is the right way to do it. And they're going to try to get the $500 million back. Stellantis is gone. They're not going to come back and say, oh, we changed our minds. Once you kiss the ring of Donald Trump, you're pretty much telling the world just what kind of a business person you are. So there's that to consider. So I'm frustrated, as most Canadians are, by their action. But I find it heartening to see that the government is doing something about it, and saying, you can't screw us around, Stellantis. There are consequences to that. That's what contracts are all about. So all of this ties in to how Canadians are viewing what's going on right now. And to that point, our good friends at the National Post, one of those conservative-leaning newspapers, right-wing-leaning newspapers, hired the folks from Leger Management poll to do a survey of what Canadians were thinking about the government. And it's interesting to look at some of these numbers, too. And as we've talked about, whether we're talking about Abacus or Leger or any of the other polls, they're very reputable firms. Nanos comes to mind, too. They're snapshots of what Canadian people are thinking about that particular day or that particular week. And it can change dramatically from day to week, depending on circumstances, right? But this one's fascinating and interesting because in light of some of the things that are happening here, and this poll was taken, by the way, before some of these employment numbers came out, so I'm that may in fact have a more positive effect on that. But what the poll finds here is the federal Liberals are holding a 43% support among decided Canadian voters, maintaining a pretty strong lead over the Conservatives. The Conservatives actually dropped 2 points. They're down to 36% now. So it's a bit of a drop there, and the gap is starting to widen just a little bit. And I find it interesting. Andrew Enns is the guy from Leger who I guess is making the comments about this. And he says there is no clear advantage for any party when you look at these numbers to suggest that going into an election would be a really good idea. Nobody wants an election, Mr. Enns. The only people that want an election are the Conservatives, that Poilievre and Andrew Scheer and people that are banging the drum. Canadians don't want an election. None of the other political parties want an election. So that's not even a factor here. And the Canadians, I think, were pretty clear about that. And, clearly just even the budget vote, I think, was an indicator that, they can bang the drum and they can all the bravado they want, from behind curtains or wherever Poilievre wants to speak from these days. The reality is I don't think the Conservatives even want an election now, too. And some of these numbers in the Leger poll, I think, bear that out. When you look at, for instance, preference for Prime Minister, Mark Carney leads the preferred Prime Minister among 40% of those polled. He's at 40%. 40%. Poilievre's at 28%. So you're darn right the Conservatives don't want to have an election right now, and neither do Canadians. So it's, as I say, it's a snapshot of what's going on now, but I think it's an indicator that Canadians, for the most part, are saying, yeah, we're still looking for some results here, but we still have faith in you, Mr. Prime Minister. We still think you're going in the right direction, and that's important right now. And when we look at some of the other factors in this that come into play, and that's why we want to talk about these on the podcast, I think it's important sometimes for us to look and say, what are the people, the experts that are looking at what Canada's doing? What are they thinking? That's why that International Monetary Fund is so important. And by the way, in that report, a lot of minutia in there too, but they did highlight the fact that they were very supportive of the idea of the last federal budget, that they were going to invest hugely in infrastructure spending as a way to try to improve the economy and get it moving again. And that goes back to the point we've been talking about on the podcast for the longest time, that governments do have to spend money to make money. And it's a matter of where you spend it and whether there's a return on investment. Now, people understand that phrase, return on investment. Put $10 into something, and if you make $20 as a result, that's a good investment. If you just throw it down the hole for something that's not going to create any money or it's not going to create jobs, you got to ask yourself, is it a worthwhile investment? So the Canadian government under Carney is making strategic investments right now, and the International Monetary Fund, the objective body that's overlooking what these economies are doing, is saying, yeah, that's the right direction. You guys are doing the right thing. So think about this right now and weigh that against some of the comments that we're hearing from some of the opposition leaders over the last couple of days. We've still got a long way to go. I mean, like I say, we're not going to try to pretend that, things are rosy, because they aren't. They aren't rosy for anybody and in any country right now. And I'm concerned as an observer about what's going on in the U.S. economy, because in the past, of course, as we said, we've been sucked in when the economy starts to go downhill in the States. It, of course, is going to have a negative impact on what's going to happen here, too. So we have to continue what we're doing right now and diversifying and talking to other trading partners, and at the same time have our government invest in manufacturing, invest in infrastructure that's going to attract that investment. That's a private sector investment, of course, which is one of the ultimate goals that the Prime Minister's talked about. So we're going in the right direction. And I think it's important for us to keep that in mind as we watch some of the things that are happening in other places in the world. The World Cup, the FIFA Cup is important, and everybody seems to have eyes on Washington to see where Canada is going to be. And yeah, that's good stuff. But the things that are going to impact our everyday lives, the price of food, the price of gas, jobs, and long-term jobs and sustainable jobs, those are on the minds of Canadians right now. And according to these stats and according to these polls that are being done right now, things are not where they should be, but at least we're moving in the right direction. And you got to know that if it was going in the other direction, if this was the third month in a row of unemployment or bad economic news, they'd be all over the government. They'd just be jumping up and down. The fact that there is essentially silence on this kind of indicates just where the media bias is when it comes to the government of the day and the way that they're looking at it right now. And that's something that we need to keep in mind, too. Hey, that's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Good to have you with us. If you're on YouTube, good to have you here. Hit that notification bell, would you please, to make sure you pass the word on. And thanks to all the subscribers. We've had a great and steady stream of new people coming on board, and we do thank you for that. Your support, your financial support, and your subscriptions help us to continue to do the work that we're doing in the podcast. So we'll keep it up as long as we have your support. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing the show, as always. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.